Beau Johnson, man, we are so excited for you to be on our podcast, the Think Wise podcast. To our listeners, Beau is one of the most authentic, sincere, interesting guys I've ever met in my entire life. And I'm excited for you all to get exposed to his insight and wisdom. So, Beau, first question. You have this long, interesting career. You've been in a lot of different spaces and places, and you're an absolute high achiever. And in every job you've ever had, you've risen quickly in influence and authority. So the first question I have for you is, what makes you want to and be able to achieve more than folks that are just happy with the status quo?
Richard, Christian, it's really great to be here. I promised you guys that you would ask some questions. They're pretty good questions, and I would not answer them. And this is one I didn't really want to answer because it's a kind reflection back on my life, and it's probably true. Excuse me. And I think the honest answer is what makes me work hard, progress quickly is probably my wounds. And that's sort of hard to even say out loud, but I think the achievement bone that's like driven deep in me comes somewhere from a wound. And here's kind of what I mean by that. And I think this is hard work to get to do, but important work to do, is for me to be able to look in the mirror and say, okay, my fear of blank is making me do blank. So when you ask, like, what is it that's making you achieve? I think that fear of not being seen as smart or fear of not being as successful as my dad is making me overachieve, overwork, and overvalue titles. So while I'm all about hard work and achievement and contributing to a flourishing world, I think the honest reflection of the last 15 years of my career is, a whole lot of that is actually motivated from a soft spot in my heart. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's, this just iterates why I think you're one of the most authentic people that I've ever known. What it makes me wonder is, at what point in your life did you come to that conclusion?
That's really interesting. I feel like life gives you mirrors along the way. You've been one of those taking assessments like the Enneagram has been some of that. Retreats are helpful for some of those things. Whenever you have enough time to kind of slow down, Andy Stanley taught me to ask this question, why am I doing this really? And I think it takes 2 or 3 times of asking that question to have a real answer. I'm sure I don't even have the most real example of that yet. And then here's part 2 of my answer, which is related to that. When you say you've progressed really quickly, it's so interesting you say that, because I would say for most of my life, I've actually felt behind. Like if you're kind of asking a question like, what is it that allowed you to get ahead? And I'd say for most of my life, I felt behind. And it was sitting in a room at 7 a.m. with a guy in his 70s who looked at this group of guys that he was meeting with and said, every man feels behind. And watching everybody around the room go, being like, oh, okay. So this isn't like a unique experience for Beau Johnson. This is a pretty universal experience of feeling like I'm not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that is like a healthy motivator in terms of motivating you to succeed? Or do you think there's times where you kind of have to be less hard on yourself?
Really interesting question. I think if you wait until you have totally pure motivations, you probably won't ever do anything. And so there's a degree to which it kind of worked for a little while, but I hope to have a bit of a more pure motivation because here's the thing, like you can accidentally chase title and then get a title and realize it wasn't the thing that you actually really wanted. And so if that's the thing that gets you to help discover what you really want, so you might have some things you thought you really wanted along the way that clarify that's not what I actually wanted. I'm going to try not to tell too many sports stories, but there was a football coach who said that one of the lowest days of his life was the day after he won the Super Bowl. Mike Singletary is his name. And he said it's because he thought this is, if I will have gotten this, I will have achieved. And then he got it and realized I'm as empty as I've ever been. That's not actually the thing that inside of me that I want most. So good question, Christian.
Yeah, okay, that story of Singletary reminds me of Jim Carrey quote saying he wishes everyone could become rich and famous to realize it's not what you want.
Oh, really interesting. Yeah, I resonate with that. But I wouldn't mind being rich. So,
well, I think that in this dialogue, Beau, there's something that I would just share about you is that while you may have led from your wounds, I do think your motivations from what I've seen are very, pure and honest. So leading from wounds is an important thing to understand. I think one thing that's come out of COVID is that we realize that that's about one of the only ways you can be an effective leader is if you're leading out of some sort of loss or hurt.
That's so good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you wait to get that all the way cleaned up or purified out of you, you're going to be waiting forever.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard Taylor Swift gave a commencement speech recently. And one of the things she told the young people was to embrace the cringe. It seems like young people today, one of the highest orders of sin is to not be seen as cool or not have everything together, or for their Instagram posts to not be absolutely perfect. So, they have those same wounds that you're talking about, yet they have a desire for perfection. Mm-hmm. What would you say to the young person who has those wounds and desires perfection, and cringe is the highest order of sin for them? What insight would you give to them?
And by cringe, you think that she means like grit, or cringe means like the messy, not quite put together parts?
Yeah, the latter, the messy stuff.
Huh. Well, I guess I'd just go back to the Andy Stanley question and say, oh, okay, so you really want the life that appears to be put together. Why do you want that really? And this is the CSI effect. So like, remember on any CSI or crime shows, or like anytime there's a murder scene and somebody's, they're interrogating the person, and the secret is to ask the question to the person 3 times. Because when you ask the question the first time, you're like, hey, did you kill that person? They're like, no, I didn't. And you go, okay, come on, did you kill him? And they go, no, I didn't kill him. And then the third time, but did you kill him? And they go, okay, I killed him. So, and the same thing goes for us. So why am I doing this really? Why am I buying this new car really? Why am I taking this Instagram video really? Why am I not calling her back really? Like when you're willing to ask it a couple times, you can kind of get to that answer that you're embarrassed to say out loud. I could say a lot more about that, but I think that's kind of how you know that you've received the answer that's really helpful for you, is saying it out loud sounds a little bit embarrassing. Yeah. So I don't know why somebody wants to be perfect, but I think them asking that question was really valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good.
So you've already shown this. You're one of the most intentional people I know. And when people are in your orbit, they feel special and they feel valued. And I want to know, is that natural to you? How do you do that? Everyone wants to be seen, be known, and you're really great at that. So talk to us about how that plays out in your life and what you do to accomplish that.
Oh, and I read that question. I thought, well, first of all, I don't think I'm like that at all. And then I thought, oh, that's because Richard and Christian are asking this. So I took some notes, and here's what I said. It's easy to be present with amazing people. It's easy to be really engaged when you're on mission. So let me say a little bit about that. Of course, you're like fully present and you have your phone away if you're out to the most amazing dinner of your life, right? Like it's easy to like fully maximize the moment if you're at a glacier in Alaska, or if you're watching the Wimbledon and you're like on the front row. So it's pretty easy to be present in people who are awesome. And I think you guys are pretty interesting. And this is the part that might get me canceled, is I feel like increasingly in my life, I only want to invest in people who are hungry. So if I'm around a hungry person, it's pretty easy to be engaged and interested in them. There's only two kinds of relationships. Either there's relationships that are sharpening you or they're dulling you. I don't think there's any in between. And I was like this in my early 20s, and I hurt so many people's feelings because they'd say, can we get together for coffee? And I'd say, you know what? I have enough coffee, but I'd love to get together if you're willing to read this book and then get together and talk about it. And then they wouldn't. And they'd come back 6 weeks later and say, well, can we get together for coffee? And I'm like, do you want me to get together with coffee with somebody who's not willing to read a book? Like, tell me more about, is there like a specific question you want to wrestle through? Is there something that's going on that you want to talk about? Or you just want to hang out? Because relationships, I'm sorry if this is so offensive, relationships are either going to sharpen me or they're going to dull me. Relationships for you are either going to sharpen you or dull you. And I just want to know, when I'm talking to somebody, are you hungry? And Richard, we're both in the business of selling things, and it's really hard to do a double sell, right? It's hard to convince somebody they need a vacuum cleaner and that they should have your vacuum cleaner. It's hard to convince somebody that they need consulting and they should have your consulting. So I don't want to have to sell somebody that they should try to be hungry. I just want to only be around hungry people. It feels so like unkind to say that. But if I were to give, and I know we're going to get to some of this, if I were to give advice to young leaders, I would say invest in hungry people and become a hungry kind of people, because leaders want to invest in hungry people. And then let me just say a little bit more about this, which is I don't know that I can think of a time when this was not true. Is there are people in your life who think that they can be the exception. And it can play out a bunch of different ways. They think, well, discipline doesn't apply to me, or I don't need to be somebody who reads books, or it's okay for me to play 8 hours of video games, or I can have 6 different relationships in 6 different months, and I can be the exception to that. And here's my observation is people who want to be the exception are rarely exceptional. I want to be around people who are willing to do the work. And it's not that I don't want to like love and serve people who don't. It's just that I'm really clear, like every relationship is either one where I'm showing up and I'm going to get sharpened, or I'm like going to really limit the amount of time that I'm going to do to pour out in places that aren't. And even that, I'm going to be choosy. I'm going to be particular, because like lukewarm water makes boiling water unboiling. Like, right? You know what I'm saying? Like lukewarm anything doesn't make other things hotter or colder. So, yeah, I'd love to know like how you respond to that.
Yeah. What would you say to a young person who wants to position themselves as being more hungry? Like maybe they are, and they don't know how to go above and beyond just asking to get coffee with someone, and they don't realize how surface level that is. Like what are some tangible like action steps that you can give a young person to say, like, this is how you can actually show this person that you're hungry?
So good. Okay. So instead of asking, can we go get coffee? I'd say, I'd love to get advice, because coffee sounds like it's just indefinite and I don't know what the agenda is, and my time is valuable and your time is valuable. So I would say, I would love to get together because I have 3 questions for you. Or maybe I would say, I heard you say this on a podcast episode or a sermon, or I read this article that you said, and I want to talk more about this specific idea. I don't know of a single leader who wouldn't say yes to that, because that shows me like you're paying attention, you're interested, you're curious, you want to grow. I want to be around people who want to grow, because here's why. This is purely selfish. I'm going to learn something. If I'm showing up with somebody who's got a question about something I said, I'm going to grow. Or if they're wrestling with a real tension, like I'm going to learn something about it. So just be more precise in your speech, more precise with your verbs and what your ask is. And I think anybody would show up. Here's a few other ways that I know that people are hungry. They're talking about what they're learning they're talking more about what they're learning and what they want to learn than they are talking about what they already know. So it's like, I love when somebody asks, what books are you reading? Or what podcasts are you listening to? Or what influential people do you have like playing in your ear when you're driving on a road trip? That just shows me some intentionality about them. I have a quick story about that, actually. My dad's a marathon runner and was a very good marathon runner for a long time. And there's this thing called the Tour de France. Most of you maybe have heard of in July, where people like bike ride across France, and bike enthusiasts love this thing. Well, the guy named Greg LeMond was the first American to win the Tour de France. And somehow he and my dad were at the same event 20 years ago. And Greg LeMond has just won like the pinnacle event for bicycle people. And he finds out my dad's a marathon runner. And he cornered my dad and wouldn't let my dad get away, because he's asking him, tell me what you eat and what do you sleep and how many days off do you take? Tell me about your water intake. Like, what heart rate are you trying to get at when you're running? This is a guy who's like on ESPN, and he's cornering a like, enthusiastic runner, but not a professional runner, because he's just insatiable in his hunger. And I was actually there. I was 9 years old. I was at this party, and I remember this scene of this guy that my dad and I had gotten up at 3 a.m. to watch on TV, cornering to my dad because he just was insatiable in his desire to get better and better and better. And that's just a picture for me of what hunger looks like, and the kind of leader that I want to be, like constantly thinking about what I don't know and how I can get better.
This is great. You're given some insight into what hunger looks like. If I'm trying to decide if I'm hungry, or to evaluate, am I hungry or am I just, wounded and trying to achieve, or whatever it is. So if I stand in front of a mirror and I look at myself and my life, what are the earmarks of identifying what a hungry person looks like?
Okay. I don't know that I can think of a checklist, but I can think of some like examples. So I worked for a guy named Andy Stanley for a couple of years, and he's a very successful author, communicator. He's one of the best communicators, I believe, in the world. And I would watch people ask Andy 2 different types of questions. One question was, how do I get to become you? Because what they want is the stage and the name and the Twitter followers and the 500,000 podcast subscribers. And then I would ask other people, say, how do I get better? And the kinds of people that are asking, how do I get better kinds of questions, that's like kind of interesting to me. Maybe another way of saying that is like, what am I chasing? And it almost never lets you down to chase learning and chase improvement and chase opportunity. It's almost always not as exciting as you think it will be to chase a title or a stage or a platform. So here's another way to say that. I think that there are actually people who are called and should be out having a social media presence, but 99% of people shouldn't. And it should just be something enjoyable that you use. I think if you're asking, how do I get more followers? That isn't like, I'd be really nervous about that question. Instead, I'd be asking, how do I get more insight? Or how do I become how do I become the kind of person that people will want to listen to? Not how do I go get more followers to listen to what I have to say already?
Yeah.
What do you think, Richard? I mean, you asked the question. What is your observation about?
Well, I think hunger comes in lots of different forms, but the words that a lot of people will use to describe hunger are achievement, accomplishment, goals. And I think that the way I would define hunger or see hunger in people is that they know where they want to go, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get there. And they have this humility to change the path along the way. And so hunger isn't about running through brick walls and accomplishing things and arriving first at the race.
Totally.
It is about, it's kind of like right-sized hunger.
Yeah.
It's eating the right things. Like, there's a lot of calories that I can consume to get my daily nutrition, but there's only few of those are the right things. So I think that that's one of the things, I would encourage not just young people, but everyone to look at is, how are you accomplishing those calories that are making you hungry? And are they worthy, and are they sustainable, and are they bringing the best out in you? But more importantly, are they bringing the best out in the world?
That's so good. Okay. One quick story about that. And then there's 100 other examples. But when I was in 8th grade, my teacher won the Disney Teacher of the Year award. And then 2 years later, he won it again. He's the only person who's ever won this thing twice. Well, an 8th grade classroom only has so many students, but David Vixie just kept asking, how do I get better? How do I get better? How do I get better? Not how do I get bigger? Not how do I get more kids in this classroom? Like, his mission is to create, I don't actually know what it is, but it appears to be, I don't know how he would say it. I mean, it appears to be, how do I create the best educational environment for these 12 and 13-year-olds? And you know what I'm saying? Like, there can be a hunger there in the same way a labor and delivery nurse can be hungry to be able to get better and better at his or her craft. Hunger doesn't necessarily mean I want a better title or even more money. It's, I see that I can go make a difference in something, and I'm going to do everything I can to give everything that I can.
And make it better. Yeah, that's great.
Make it better.
Yeah. The two words that are coming to my mind as we have this conversation about hunger are intentionality and humility. Would you agree that those are kind of the themes of what it takes to be hungry?
I love it. And I think, Christian, humility is very confusing to people because they think sometimes it's either being self-deprecating or thinking little of yourself. And it's actually the posture that you have of like a position to serve. Somebody could be on a stage talking to 10,000 people and be wonderfully humble. And somebody could be yelling into a microphone to an audience of none and be very prideful.
Yeah.
Good words.
So you've worked with a lot of young professionals throughout your career. What would you say to young professionals who have really big dreams and goals but are struggling to actually act towards those? They may feel like they know what it takes to get there, but they aren't taking that action step to actually do it.
Okay, so it's interesting to hear you ask the question. I had a thought, and now I have a couple new ones. One is they might have the wrong dream. In fact, they might be borrowing somebody else's dream, and they should pay attention to their gut because their uncle is saying, go get a law degree. And they're like, I know what it takes to get a law degree. But really it's also, I'm not going to be satisfied and fully alive doing that dream from somebody else. So first, like, pay attention to that. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the conversation, I think, but we put so much pressure on ourselves to have figured life out too early. Like, it is absolutely ridiculous that we would ask 18-year-olds to pick a major and pick a life career when really you should spend a lot of your 20s exploring different things to figure out how you want to spend most of your life having a season of influence and impact. So that's the first thing I'd say, Christian, is if somebody's struggling to get started, it might be an indicator about they have the wrong finish line in mind. But if somebody's like, I really want to start a lawn care business, but I just don't know how to get started, or I really wanted to run a 10K and I just don't know how to get started, or I really want to learn how to code and I just don't know how to get started. Really, they probably do know how to get started. It's just that here's what it is. We think in our mind there's 26 steps. Sometimes there's actually like 3 steps. And I would just say, start. Just start. And Christian, I watch people do this and I recognize it because it's in me too, that we can spin our wheels doing things like let's say somebody is like, I want to start a business. So they figure out the branding and they build a website and they start a podcast about it, and they actually just need to go freaking cut the grass. Like, they just need to go work. Like, instead of coming up with your sales strategy and getting business cards printed, you should go call 3 people that you know and say, I think I could do this for you and add a lot of value to you.
Yes.
Just start. Richard, go. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, that's startup mindset. And there's a lot of startups that are great. But one of my frustrations about startup mindset is most startup organizations would rather raise money than do the good that they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And the next round of funding is the biggest deal. It's like, what if all of us made our customers our primary funders? Because we're adding so much value to the world that they're going to go, help us
so
launch
good.
whatever we're doing. And that's it. Like, go do something. We don't need to polish a website and a brochure to perfection. We need to go add value to the world. And when we do, and it wants to happen, good things come. But it's so much safer to sit behind my Mac and tweak up the website than it is to go out and be vulnerable.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think a big problem too is like young people think that they're being productive by doing those things, but it's just another form of procrastination. And so I guess, like, what would you say to someone who is in that position? And if you were to confront them about it, they're saying, oh no, like I'm working really hard on this every day. Like I'm building the website, I'm doing the branding, but like they can't get that out of their head that they're not actually being productive.
Okay. That's pretty interesting. I would say to them, now I'm kind of putting on business consultant hat a little bit. And I'd say, how about we pick together what you're going to measure? And if I was an owner of your company and you were an owner of your company, at the end of the month, what are the numbers that we would have moved the needle on? Because I can tell you what, there isn't any shareholder asking you to log how many hours you worked. They want to know like how many dollars came in, how many leads came in. And I think that person would come to that conclusion too. It's that they're listening to too many freaking podcasts telling them that they need to have a sales and branding strategy when they need to sweat a little bit. And even as I'm saying that, Christian, I'm having a hard time because I'm feeling empathy for that person.
Mm-hmm.
That it is, you can kind of feel stuck. And a lot of times I wonder if that's because we're not comfortable with things that we can't control. And so I would just be, okay, why am I doing this really? Why am I doing this really? Oh, it's because I feel like I can control the website and I can control the business cards, but I can't control what my neighbor's going to say if I knock on his door and say, can you give me 15 minutes about this product? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's so good. I think that general idea of letting go of control is really hard for everyone, but for young professionals especially, and just accepting that you kind of have to get out of your comfort zone and go to the places that you don't have control over. That's how you'll actually make gains in what you're trying to do.
Yep.
Well, this podcast is the Beau Johnson episode, but we are bringing up Andy Stanley a ton. I have another Andy Stanley quote, and I want your reaction to this. I remember Andy Stanley talking about you got two types of people. You got thinkers and doers, and you're better off hiring a doer and helping them to think better than trying to activate a thinker. And, the truth in that is that you want both. But if you have a choice between someone who has a predisposition to doing versus thinking, it's the doing.
Mm-hmm.
So one, you worked with Andy and you saw that firsthand. And then in the context of this conversation, what's your thoughts around that statement?
Well, it goes to, it's so fun to do this live, Richard. It goes to something I think about how companies work and how they misuse their boards. So let's say you're a young person and you're trying to start something. If I were them, I'd be thinking about your like brain trust that's around you. And let's be clear, they're not your owners and they're not the ones driving your day to day, but they are there for input. They're there to help you do two things: to pay attention to potential and then make decisions when decisions are tricky. But you're there to be the muscle and the work. So go borrow that insight as much as you can. And again, I think if you sat down with a leader you respected and said, hey, I'm starting this business and I'm having a hard time deciding, should I bring on, should I take on debt or should I move a little slower? They'll love that conversation. But if you sit down with somebody and say, I'm having a hard time getting going, they're like, that's not as fun of a conversation. Everybody that I know that's like in a board type role or oversight role, we would all say something like this: I'd rather show somebody the lane than the gas. I'd rather have to show them like, hey, stay in your lane, than have to show them where the gas pedal is. What's interesting is underneath this conversation, I feel like we haven't quite solved the problem yet in the conversation today, is if somebody isn't hungry, if they're not as prone to that like grit work, what do you do about that? How do you go find that? Christian, what do you think about that? Because you must have friends around you, or just observe even in yourself and those around you, that some people have it naturally to want to hit the track early and want to go, and others don't. How do you help somebody develop that if they don't have it?
I think like looking at peers that I have who maybe do need to get a little more pushing and have to develop that a little more. I feel like a lot of times it's once there's actual real life pressure that comes into their life, like they need to start making money, or they need to like they start thinking long term and realizing what they actually want out of life, and like have some good pressure that forces them to really, really have to care about being hungry. I think that'd be the best way to describe it, is I almost
That's
have to have a
pretty
need.
good. One way to get hunger is to actually be hungry.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and to have something that you're accountable to, that's not just given to you. Yeah. Contribution that you're forced to make. Yeah.
I would here's something I would say about all this is, when I look back, I'm 37. When I look back on every year prior to this year, I'm like, oh wow, the stakes were pretty low. But in the moment, the stakes feel really high, and they're not. Like, here we go. I'm going to go on a rant now. Is if we never said the word side hustle again, it would be too soon. Because if you are less than 40, you should not do a side hustle. You should hustle. Like, if you're 26 and you're thinking about, oh, maybe I'll do a side hustle of real estate, in the rearview mirror, here's what I would say is, just give everything that you can for 2 years to real estate. Don't do a side hustle of I'm going to find time on Friday afternoons. Say, I wonder how far I could make it in the next 90 days. And you will do more in 90 days than most below average realtors will do in 10 years. So quit thinking about the side hustle thing. Say, I'm doing this. And what will happen is you'll find some hunger, because either that thing is going to sink or it's going to sail, and it's totally up to you. And you'll actually find some drive there to go all in to do it. Instead of saying, I'm going to write someday, or I'm going to write on the side. Nobody wants to read the book of somebody who writes on the side. Go write a book. Go like all in and actually write the book. Okay, now I'm stepping off of my soapbox. Richard?
Yeah, we share that soapbox. I think that the side hustle to help pay for vacation, or to, help put the transmission back in your car, those kinds of things for extra money, that's different. That's not a side hustle. That's hustling. And when we what's the Chinese proverb, the man who chases many rabbits catch none. Mm-hmm. And what you're saying is why would you go after the gazelle, not the rabbits? Like, go after that one big thing. And that's the I guess my contribution to the question you asked, Christian, is what's the best decision that you can make right now? You just have to make one good decision toward your goal and go make that. And then when you've done that, you can make the next one. And I think because of all of the podcasts and information that's out there, and then the sheer quantity of content, we know a whole lot, but we are not for sure what step to take.
And we should relieve ourselves of the pressure of having the good answer at the Thanksgiving table when our great aunt asks, so what are you doing with your life? Never let that into your mind, because whatever 10-year goals you had 10 years ago all ended up being wrong, Richard. And the 10-year goals I would have made 10 years ago were all wrong. Like, forget about it. Just go do something all in, and that will reveal and show you something about you, and show you something about what you'll be able to do next. You'll get way more insight by doing than you'll ever get by sitting around and waiting to have the perfect answer.
Yeah. Well, and 37-year-old Beau giving 27-year-old Beau advice is much better than 27-year-old Beau giving 37-year-old Beau advice. Because 27-year-old Beau, I knew him, wanted to give 37-year-old Beau advice, and it wouldn't have been terrible, but it's not going to be nearly as good as with the perspective you have now.
That's good.
Yeah, going off of that, just reflecting on the past 10 to 15 years of your life, like, I guess, what would you say were some of the biggest mistakes you made that are clear now but weren't clear when you made them?
Well, I'll go ahead and say my dad warned me about all of them, and I didn't listen to them fully. I kind of was like, oh, yeah, okay. And most of them have to do with the word trajectory. So let me give you a few examples. Another friend of mine would say, I didn't play the movie forward. I didn't think if I do this, it will lead to this. So let me give you some examples. I didn't think about, if I go work for this person, I'm going to become like them, because that's true. I didn't think about the ramifications of that. I didn't think about, if I go into this field, then 10 years from now, it will likely mean this. Does that make sense? So I'll get a little more vulnerable there. I spent a lot of time working in nonprofit work. And when you're young and you're idealistic and you kind of think of yourself as the exception, you don't think about how that's going to be difficult to pay for mortgages and braces and kids' education. And I would have spent more time forcing myself to make the Excel spreadsheet of XYZ, ABC decision will lead to XYZ outcome. And people around me told me that, but it was hard for me to listen to them. So I have 3. That's number 1. Number 2 is, if I were to tell 20-year-old self something, it would be something like this. You can live in the small house longer than you think you can. You can wear the old suit longer than you think you can. You can drive the used car longer than you think you can. And everybody around you is kind of upgrading, but you don't know what their budget is. Everybody around you is kind of looking for what's next. And Nicole, that's my wife, and I were talking about this. We're like, every time we were in a house and thought we need to move into a bigger house, we were wrong. We didn't know it at the time, but we could have made it 2 more years. Does that make sense? And that seems like a kind of a small, silly thing, but they all add up. What do you guys think about that?
Definitely. I think that just comes from, social and cultural pressure that you need to kind of get rid of and realize it's not like, what's the deep reason for wanting to upgrade? Is it just to keep up with your friends, or is it a necessity?
You think you deserve it?
Why am I doing this?
Really?
Why am I doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
Why am I doing this?
Okay, here's the third thing, which let's really try to upset some people. This is the third thing I would tell a 20-year-old Beau, is deep down in my desire to go work in a church context and work in a nonprofit context was that I believed it was more impactful than working in the marketplace. And if I could go and hold my own shoulders and look me in the eyes, I would say the future of impact is in the marketplace. Actually, the best way that you can impact your community is to go lead a team of people. And I love church work. We're involved in a church. I love nonprofit work. We're involved in a nonprofit. A lot, like heavily. But I would say your greatest impact is going and leading in the marketplace. It's leading in the business community. And it doesn't feel that way. You're going to wrestle with that for years, but you actually have the greater potential for impact by going and doing that. Now, I'm not saying that for everybody who's listening here, but I know that people who are listening are wrestling with that thing of like, should I go work in social work or the social sector or at a nonprofit because it feels like I'm going to make a difference? You can make a difference working in a business. You can make a difference because you're leading a team, you're promoting the dignity of the people around you, and you can guide that organization to be one that makes a difference in its community. And whether it doesn't feel like this is kind, it doesn't feel like it's good, but the businesses in our community are the gorillas that have the 400-pound weight to actually move and steer culture.
Yeah.
So, go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to a guy who didn't read this in a book. You're listening to someone who's been there, experienced that, contemplated, wrestled with it. Like our friend Brian Dick says, Dr. Brian Dick, make your job your calling. A lot of people want to go want the position in the company or the organization to be called to it. But we each have a call and a purpose inside of us that we are uniquely made for. And if we take that with us wherever we go, our calling is there.
Yes. Come on.
Yeah. All right, Beau, last question. What's the best advice you've ever been given?
Okay, the best advice I've been given recently, and I'm just starting to understand it. And that is that leadership is more emotional than intellectual. The process of leading people is less about the cerebral leadership theories and more about the ability to know what's happening between the connections of people. In fact, more and more, I'm a believer that a healthy leader can make any leadership theory look brilliant. So all of the HBR articles and all of the theories, and I work for a guy who writes leadership books. All that is helpful, but really leadership is about people, and it's about the emotional processes and the emotional environment and relational environment that's going on between people. And that feels like, I don't know if I quite am answering your question. That feels like the piece of advice that I'm really chewing on right now. And it feels like is illuminating so many things that I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. As we wrap this interview up, one thing that we want to make sure this podcast really does is give action steps for young people, and not just, because we've been talking about a lot of great ideas. This has been an awesome conversation, but we want everyone that listens to this to be able to hop off this podcast and go do something later today. So if you were to take the conversation we had today and give one or two pieces of actual things someone can go do to improve their life and their career, what would those be?
Oh, great question. I would say you can't make old friends. So the relationships that you're building today are going to be a lot of what carries you. So specifically what I do is write down the names of two people that are pretty hungry and that you could talk about what are the wounds that might be motivating you, and that could help you ask that question, why am I doing this really? And if you just connected with those two people, you should text them today and say, let's get together and let's wrestle through these two questions together. That will carry you far further than you can really ever imagine. Is your relationships are what maximize and make exponentially greater any skill set that you could ever have.
That's great. I want to put an exclamation point on that. And I want to add one of the pieces of advice that I consider the best advice I've ever gotten. It's at least at the top, and it was given to me by you. And you said most everyone in the world is willing to give you 90% of the truth. They'll let you see and they'll share 90% of the truth, but it's that last 10% that they're holding back on that you really need to hear. And I am forever grateful for that last 10% from you and from your witness of that. And I think everything you shared today fit in that last 10% category. So Beau Johnson, we are better because of your insight, your vulnerability, your courage, and your humility. We love you, everyone. Where can folks stay engaged with you?
Oh, that's going to be, I guess, sort of hard to do. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can text me. My cell phone number is 970-222-3331.
Beau Johnson, thanks for being on the Think Wise podcast. We appreciate
Grateful,
you.
Guys.
Thanks, Beau.